It's 3:45 in the afternoon, and the hearing room is warmer than it should be. The air conditioning is running, but with this many people, this many cameras, it doesn't matter. Secretary Yellen sits at the center table. In front of her, a binder, a glass of water, and a small stack of prepared remarks. Her hands rest on either side of the binder, not moving. The chairman has just finished his opening statement. Standard language about fiscal responsibility, economic stability, the importance of transparency. Now it's time for questions. Representative Dawson from Ohio goes first. He asks about inflation projections for the next quarter. Secretary Yellen answers. She references the binder, cites figures, 2.4%, 2.6% by year-end. Her tone is measured, professional. She's answered these questions before. Dawson asks a follow-up about interest rates. Yellen responds without looking at the binder this time. She says the Federal Reserve is monitoring the data closely. She says adjustments will be made as needed. She says the fundamentals remain sound. No one in the room reacts. This is expected testimony. These are expected answers. But then Dawson asks something else. He asks, Madam Secretary, during your last briefing with the Financial Stability Oversight Council, were any concerns raised about liquidity in the banking sector? Yellen pauses, just for a moment. Then she says, liquidity is always a topic of discussion at FSOC meetings. It's part of our mandate. But were specific concerns raised? We review stress indicators regularly. That's standard procedure. Dawson leans back. He seems satisfied. But he's not smiling. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is sitting 3 seats to the left. She hasn't said anything yet. She has a notepad in front of her, but it's blank. Her pen is capped. She's watching Secretary Yellen, but not intensely, just watching. Her posture is relaxed, professional. One hand rests on the table, the other in her lap. The next question comes from Representative Chen, California. He asks about employment numbers. Yellen responds with data. She says job growth is steady. She says wage growth is outpacing inflation in certain sectors. She says the labor market remains resilient. Chen asks about consumer confidence. Yellen says it's holding. She references a recent survey. She says spending patterns indicate stability. Chen nods. He yields his time. The chairman looks at his notes. Then he looks at the clock on the wall. It's 3:52. He says the chair recognizes Representative Ocasio-Cortez. AOC doesn't stand. She uncaps her pen, slowly. The sound is small but somehow audible in the quiet room. She places the cap on the table. Then she looks down at her blank notepad. She writes something. One line. Then she looks up. She says, Madam Secretary, thank you for being here. Yellen nods. Thank you. AOC pauses. She's looking at her notepad now, at the single line she just wrote. Then she says, in your prepared testimony, you mentioned that inflation has stabilized at manageable levels. Can you define manageable in this context? Yellen responds, manageable means within our target range of 2%, with minor fluctuations that don't indicate structural instability. And we're within that range now. Current projections suggest we are approaching that range. Yes. AOC writes something else on her notepad. Then she looks up again. Approaching, so we're not there yet. We're moving in the right direction, but not there yet. Yellen shifts slightly in her seat. Inflation is dynamic. We measure trends, not single data points. AOC nods slowly. Then she says, Madam Secretary, when did you last meet with the heads of the major commercial banks? The question lands differently. It's not about numbers or projections. It's about meetings, about conversations. Yellen says, I meet with banking sector representatives regularly. It's part of my role. When was the last time? I'd need to check my schedule. This month? Yellen pauses. Yes. How many banks were represented? Several. Can you name them? Yellen looks at the binder in front of her. She doesn't open it. She says, I believe representatives from J.P. Morgan, Bank of America, Citi, and Wells Fargo were present. Anyone else? Possibly. I'd need to confirm. AOC writes something down. Her pen moves steadily across the page. Then she stops writing, but doesn't look up. She just sits there, pen hovering over the notepad. The room is quiet. Someone coughs in the back row. A camera adjusts its angle. Secretary Yellen takes a sip of water. Then AOC looks up and asks, what did you discuss? Yellen says, general economic conditions, market outlook, regulatory updates. Anything about liquidity? Yellen's hand moves to the binder. She doesn't open it, just touches it. Liquidity is always a topic when meeting with banks. Was it discussed at this meeting specifically? Yes. Were concerns raised? Banks always have concerns. It's their nature. But were specific concerns raised about their ability to meet short-term obligations? Yellen doesn't answer immediately. She's looking at AOC now. Not at the chairman, not at the cameras, just at AOC. Then she says, banks are managing their liquidity positions appropriately. AOC tilts her head slightly. That's not what I asked. The room feels smaller now. The chairman is watching both of them. Representative Chen has stopped looking at his phone. Even the cameras seem to have stilled. Yellen says, some banks mention that they are monitoring their reserve levels more closely than usual. But this is prudent risk management, not a signal of distress. AOC writes something else. Then she says, how many banks mention this? I don't have the exact number. More than one. Yes. More than three. Yellen pauses. Yes. AOC sets her pen down. She places both hands flat on the table. Then she says, Madam Secretary, are you aware of any banks that have requested emergency access to Federal Reserve discount window facilities in the past 30 days? The question hangs in the air. It's technical, it's specific, and it's not something that gets asked in public hearings unless someone already knows the answer. Yellen says, banks access the discount window for various reasons. It's a standard tool. I'm asking if any banks have requested emergency access. The discount window is confidential. I can't discuss individual institutions. I'm not asking for names. I'm asking if it happened. Yellen looks at the chairman. The chairman looks back at her, but doesn't say anything. Then Yellen says, some institutions have utilized the discount window recently. Yes, for emergency purposes, the discount window doesn't categorize access that way. But these weren't routine transactions. Yellen shifts again. Routine is a subjective term. AOC picks up her pen again. She taps it once against the notepad. Then she says, Madam Secretary, in your last testimony before this committee, you stated that the banking sector was experiencing record capital reserves. Do you remember that? Yes. When was that testimony? March of this year. Yes. And now, 7 months later, multiple banks are accessing the discount window in ways you describe as not routine. Is that correct? Yellen says, the discount window is there to be used. Its usage doesn't indicate a problem. But it indicates something changed. Markets are dynamic, so something changed. Yellen doesn't respond. She's looking at the binder again. Her hand is still on it, but she hasn't opened it once during this entire hearing. AOC leans forward slightly. Not much, just enough. She says, Madam Secretary, when you met with the bank representatives this month, did anyone mention concerns about commercial real estate exposure? The room goes very quiet. Yellen says, commercial real estate is a sector we monitor. That's not what I asked. Yes, it was discussed. Were concerns raised? The sector is experiencing adjustment. Were concerns raised about specific portfolios? Yellen looks at AOC for a long moment. Then she says, some institutions noted that they are reviewing their exposure levels because values are declining. Values are adjusting to market conditions. Declining. Yellen doesn't respond. AOC writes something else on her notepad. Then she says, Madam Secretary, do you know how much commercial real estate debt is held by regional banks? Yellen says, regional banks have significant exposure to commercial real estate. This is well documented. How much? I don't have the exact figure. Approximately. Several $100 billion. And how much of that is at risk? Risk is difficult to quantify without. How much is at risk? Yellen stops. She takes another sip of water. When she sets the glass down, her hand is steadier than before, but only just. She says, we are monitoring the situation closely, but you don't have a number. Risk assessment is ongoing. AOC sets her pen down again. Then she says, Madam Secretary, are you aware of any regional banks that have reported significant losses in their commercial real estate portfolios in the past quarter? Yellen says, some institutions have reported write-downs. How many? I don't have the exact count. More than 5? Yellen pauses. Possibly. More than 10? I'd need to review the data, but you're aware it's happening. Yes. The chairman shifts in his seat. He glances at the clock. It's 4:07. He looks like he wants to say something, but he doesn't. AOC picks up her pen again. She holds it vertically now, tip resting on the notepad. She says, Madam Secretary, in your opening statement, you said the financial system is sound. You said risks are manageable. You said there are no immediate concerns about systemic stability. Is that still your position? Yellen says, yes. Even with multiple banks accessing emergency facilities, commercial real estate values declining, and institutions reporting significant losses, those factors are being managed. By whom? By the institutions themselves, under our supervision. AOC looks down at her notepad. She's quiet for a moment. Then she says, Madam Secretary, when you briefed the president last week, did you mention any of these issues? Yellen's expression doesn't change, but something shifts. Something small but noticeable. She says, my conversations with the president are confidential, but you did brief him. I brief the president regularly on economic matters. Did you mention the discount window activity? I can't discuss the content of those briefings. Did you mention the commercial real estate losses? My briefings cover a range of topics. Did you mention that regional banks are under stress? Yellen says nothing. Her hand is still on the binder. She's looking at AOC, and AOC is looking back at her. The room is completely silent now. No coughing, no camera adjustments, just silence. Then AOC says, Madam Secretary, I'd like to enter a document into the record. The chairman looks at her. What document? A Federal Reserve internal memo, dated 2 weeks ago. The chairman says, do you have a copy? AOC reaches into a folder beside her. She pulls out a single sheet of paper. It's not thick, it's not marked with classifications. It's just a piece of paper, but the way she holds it makes it feel heavier. She says, this memo was sent from the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco to the Board of Governors. It outlines concerns about deposit outflows at multiple regional institutions. It specifically mentions 3 banks by name, and it recommends immediate monitoring protocols be put in place. Yellen's hand moves off the binder. Both hands are in her lap now. AOC continues. The memo is dated October 29th. Your meeting with the bank representatives was October 30. 1 day later. Did you discuss this memo at that meeting? Yellen says, I'm not familiar with every internal memo produced by the Federal Reserve System, but you're familiar with this one. I'd need to see it. AOC holds up the paper. She doesn't hand it over. She just holds it. It's addressed to you, personally. At the top it says, for Secretary Yellen's immediate attention. Did you receive this memo? Yellen doesn't answer. Madam Secretary, did you receive this memo? Yellen says, I receive many memos. Did you receive this one? The silence stretches. 5 seconds. 10. Then Yellen says, yes, and you discussed it at the meeting. I don't recall the specific agenda, but you received it the day before the meeting. A memo marked for your immediate attention, about deposit outflows and potential monitoring protocols, and you don't recall if you discussed it. Yellen says, the meeting covered multiple topics. Was this one of them? Yellen doesn't answer. AOC sets the paper down on the table in front of her, face up. The camera can't read it from this distance, but everyone is looking. She says, Madam Secretary, this memo mentions 3 banks. One of them is Pacific Valley Bank. Are you familiar with that institution? Yellen says, I'm familiar with many institutions. Pacific Valley Bank reported a 12% deposit outflow in September. Is that correct? I'd need to verify the exact figure, and they accessed the discount window on October 15th. As I said, I can't discuss individual institutions, but this memo does. This memo specifically identifies Pacific Valley Bank as requiring immediate monitoring, and you received this memo. And then you met with banking representatives, and you didn't think it was relevant to mention in your testimony today that we have regional banks experiencing double-digit deposit outflows. The chairman interrupts, Representative, I think, but AOC keeps going. She says, Madam Secretary, how many other banks are in the same situation? Yellen says, I don't have that information in front of me, but you have it. The data exists, yes. How many? I can't provide that number without proper context. How many banks are experiencing deposit outflows significant enough to trigger Federal Reserve monitoring protocols? Yellen looks at the chairman again. This time the chairman looks away. Then Yellen says, several, not 3, several. Yes, more than 5? Yellen doesn't answer. More than 10? Still nothing. AOC leans back in her chair. She's not writing anymore. Her pen is on the table. Her hands are folded in front of her. She says, Madam Secretary, in your prepared testimony today, you said inflation is stabilizing. You said the labor market is resilient. You said the financial system is sound. But you didn't mention that multiple regional banks are experiencing significant deposit outflows. You didn't mention that commercial real estate portfolios are reporting major losses. You didn't mention that institutions are accessing emergency facilities. Why not? Yellen says, my testimony focused on the overall economic outlook. The overall outlook doesn't include the banking sector. The banking sector is part of the financial system, which I addressed. You said it was sound. It is sound, with multiple banks under stress. Stress is not the same as instability, but it's not the same as sound either. Yellen doesn't respond. OAC picks up the paper again. She looks at it. Then she looks at Secretary Yellen. Then she says, Madam Secretary, when you briefed the president last week, did you tell him that the financial system is sound? Yellen says, as I stated, my conversations with the president are confidential, but you did say that. I can't confirm the content of those discussions. Did you tell him about the deposit outflows? I briefed the president on all relevant economic data, but did you specifically mention the deposit outflows at regional banks? Yellen's jaw tightens. Just slightly. She says, I provided a comprehensive briefing. That's not an answer. The chairman tries again. Representative, I think we should. OAC raises her hand. Not aggressively. Just enough. The chairman stops. She says, Madam Secretary, one more question. Yellen doesn't respond. She's just waiting. OAC looks down at the paper in her hand. Then she looks up. She says, this memo, the one from the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco. It has a second page. No one in the room moves. OAC continues. On that second page, there's a projection. It estimates that if deposit outflows continue at the current rate, at least 6 regional institutions will face capital adequacy concerns within 90 days. That's by the end of January. Did you include this projection in your briefing to the president? Yellen says nothing. Did you include it in your testimony today? Nothing. Madam Secretary, did you inform this committee that we potentially have 6 banks approaching capital adequacy problems in the next 3 months? The room is frozen. The cameras are still rolling. The chairman has his hand on his gavel but hasn't moved. Representative Chen is staring at OAC. Representative Dawson is staring at Secretary Yellen. Yellen's hands are on the table now, both of them. Flat. She says projections are not certainties, but they're projections based on current data. Yes, and this projection exists. Yes, and you didn't mention it. Yellen opens her mouth, then closes it. Then she says the situation is being monitored. OAC sets the paper down. She places both hands on the table. Then she says very quietly, "Madam Secretary, are we facing a banking crisis?" The silence is absolute. No one breathes. No one moves. Yellen looks at AOC, then at the chairman, then at the cameras. Her mouth opens slightly, as if to speak, and then she stops. Her hands are still on the table. The binder is still closed. The cameras are still rolling, and no one says a word.